Okay. Sorry, go
All
ahead.
right. Cool. So yeah, let's just get started. Yeah, this is my contact details, in case if you guys have any questions, I'm happy to, have like a follow-up discussion. So yeah, don't be shy, please feel free to reach out. So, okay, oops. All right, yeah, I'll just quickly introduce myself. So yeah, hi, I'm Nikhil Sarda. I studied at KGP, IIT Kharagpur, from 2006 to 2011, and then I was a grad student at Columbia University. Worked at a startup for some time, and then I've been at Google ever since. For the past almost 4 years, I've been at Google AI. So, kind of like jumped on the whole like ML bandwagon. At my day job, I basically apply reinforcement learning algorithms to real world problems. So, there are like lots of softwares out there which, have all sorts of heuristics, which, we try to basically replace with machine learning, right? So, in caches, for instance, can we use machine learning and make, caches better? I've applied machine learning to compilers, applied, machine learning to like the search stack. We have like some cool papers that are going to be released. So yeah, it's pretty, cool work. But I'm also extremely intrigued by Web3 and the whole sort of community that has built around it. And the, like different way of sort of like thinking about problems that we have solved in the 1980s and 1990s, and how they are being sort of like rethought of today. I also have a background in systems research. So at Columbia University, I was doing a bunch of research on software systems, software testing, and I'm always interested in seeing like cool new systems and how they work and what are the underlying principles, right? That like form the foundation, right, of systems that have like real impact. So it's impossible not to get intrigued by all the activity that is happening in the crypto space today. So I'm basically coming at it from like a very sort of like a researchy angle, right? And it's just super interesting to me. Cool. So in this talk, I'm basically going to be talking about working with NFTs, specifically in Solana. So I'll like talk about Solana a little bit and the whole sort of like ecosystem around it a little bit. I'll give a quick intro to the Slack bot API, right? So what we're trying to do is basically get NFTs into Slack. And then at the same time, I'm also going to like talk about how we can integrate Slack or any other like Web2 application, right, which has the right hooks with non-custodian crypto wallet, right, like MetaMask or Phantom. And then finally we'll actually get into the details of like how you can import your NFTs in Slack for fun. Unfortunately, I don't think it's profitable per se. It's just amusing, right? If you have like your DJ ape or something, or your Bored Ape, as like an emoji or a meme, right, that you can like send to your friends or something. Cool. So the next slide. All right. So very quickly, what are NFTs? So I'm actually assuming that like a lot of people here are kind of aware of what's happening in the crypto space. But just in case, if you aren't, right, like NFTs are basically non-fungible tokens. And what that means is that like it signifies unique ownership, right? And because these tokens are non-fungible, there is an artificial scarcity associated with it, right? And an NFT can represent art, sound, video, pretty much anything. And because of that, like, because of this like whole sort of like unique ownership aspect around it, it tends to be very valuable. And because it's valuable, it's also being used as a speculative instrument. So, we've had like some very well-known NFT collections like CryptoPunks or Bored Ape Yacht Club or DJ Apes in Solana, right, that have seen like stratospheric, valuations, right? So, all of this is super interesting, but what exactly are NFTs good for so far? And honestly, in my opinion, they are like war, they're good for absolutely nothing, right? It's just like a nice little thing that you can have. in your wallet that you can show around to your friends. It's like a status symbol, right? You're not really using it to do anything useful. So I want to like, see if you can try and, change that, right? All right. Let's see, my mouse stopped working there for a bit. Cool. So let's talk a little bit about Solana, right? It's an L1 blockchain. It's an Ethereum competitor. And specifically, it's competing with Ethereum in the aspects of, gas fees. As we all know, Ethereum has like very high gas fees. And also on transactions per second, right? Ethereum has like very low TPS. I think it's definitely less than 100. I don't know what the latest figures are. And it also, aims to be a bit more sort of easy to sort of, program with, right? So we'll get to that. Its consensus mechanism is called proof of history. It's essentially a cryptographic clock. I'm not going to go into the details of that, but it's a very interesting sort of counter to, the consensus mechanisms we are all aware of, like, Nakamoto consensus, proof of work, proof of stake, and things like that. Solana has very high throughput. They have a claimed max of 65,000 TPS, which I assume they measured in some sort of an artificial environment. And I actually tested this. I tried to test, like how much throughput that we can actually get, and I got some interesting results. So we can talk about that as well. And finally, it uses Rust instead of Solidity for writing smart contracts, right? So the one issue with Solidity is that it's not really a formally specified language. It's got its own weird, idiosyncrasies. It's a little bit eccentric, and it doesn't really have a formal specification. It's also not exactly very fast, right? On the other hand, Rust is memory safe. It's got a formal specification. It's got some great compilers, and it's got some great people working behind it. And Rust is used for a large number of pretty sophisticated systems applications, right? And there's a very good chance that in the future Rust might even be used in the Linux kernel code. So far it looks good, right? Like definitely, looks a bit more principled, right? But we'll see. Now, let's talk a little bit about Metaplex, right? So Metaplex calls itself the NFT standard for the Solana network, right? So what does that mean? Well, in Ethereum, we have things like ERC 721, right? So these are essentially like requests for comments, or there are EIPs, which are improvement proposals, and they basically publish an interface describing how certain aspects in the Ethereum network should be like, right? ERC 721 is a famous one because it was the first standard that talks explicitly about the concept of a non-fungible token, right? ERC 20 talks about fungible tokens, right? And like Solana doesn't really have an equivalent, right? So Metaplex basically aims to be that standard for Solana, right? So these guys are basically strategic partner. They call themselves that for the Solana network. And essentially what they are like what any NFT is really, it's basically an instance of like a smart contract, right? Normally in like Ethereum land, like ERC 721s are authored in Solidity. So you have things like OpenZeppelin or OpenSea. They have their own like ERC 721 implementations that you can use to mint your tokens. Similarly, in Solana, you have like a bunch of smart contracts that are written in Rust, and you can use them to essentially mint Solana specific NFTs, right? And the nice thing is that like they have really, really low transaction fees. So if any of you have actually minted an NFT on Ethereum, like that you're paying out of your like hands, right? Like for like really, really high gas fees if you want to mint or if you want to transfer. On the other hand, like these are the latest prices that I pulled from the Metaplex page. This is like pretty low. Like you can basically mint an auction, an NFT on Solana for under $10, right? So that's pretty cool. You don't have to basically worry about like high gas fees or things like that, right? So here are like some of the other sort of like advantages, right? Like the entire sort of ecosystem, like on the face of it, seems to be pretty principled. It builds on top of Spl token, which is Solana's native token library. It's supposed to be very well supported. Minting is fast and it succeeds more often. As we all know with Ethereum, there's no guarantee that your transaction actually goes through. And if, for whatever reason, if your transaction fails, then you basically lose all the money that you spent on gas, right? So you really want to ensure that like your transaction succeeds, and occasionally like it takes like a really long time for your transaction to succeed, right? But on the other hand, with Solana, like it's kind of true. Your minting is fast. It tends to succeed more often. But the other cool thing is that like there are no complexities involved with L2s, sidechains, or rollups, right? So people have noticed that Ethereum has this whole scaling problem, right? And their solution to this are essentially like chains that are an abstraction on top of Ethereum, like L2s, or they'll have a side chain, which basically does like a whole bunch of transactions separate from the main chain, and then every once in a while, sort of commits it back. And you have like rollups, ZK rollup is like a famous one, right? Where it's essentially the same concept, but it tends to be more, decentralized, right? But these are all like additional complexities in Ethereum land. You have to like worry about the, like what exactly is the solution you're sort of going for, and you have to really understand it, right? But out here with Solana, you just work with the L1 directly. You don't need to worry about these like weird, like scaling solutions. So all of that is cool, right? So let's get on to actually like how do we mint an NFT, right? So here's some code for how we can mint an NFT, and I'll go through this step by step. And if you guys have any questions, please feel free to interrupt me, and I'm happy to answer, right? So Solana, just like Ethereum, has a Web3.js library that you can import, right? So you would go ahead and import that. And the very first thing that you want to do if you want to mint an NFT, right? If you don't have your own wallet, you can basically go ahead and generate a wallet key pair, right? So just remember that like a wallet basically consists of two keys, right? Like a private key and a public key. Your public key is your public persona. That's basically the key that you make available to the rest of the world. And if you want to actually commit a transaction into the blockchain, you would use your private key to sign it, right? And that indicates that, and that transaction can be verified by your public key, right? So that's basically like a way in which you're sort of like advertising to the world that this transaction originated from me, right? Or anyone else who might have my private key, right? So you would go ahead and like generate a wallet. And then, of course, in order to mint an NFT, right? Like you would need some amount of currency in it, right? So we'll basically go ahead and airdrop some SOL into this. Now, obviously, this will not work in the prod network. You would have to actually buy fiat and convert it to SOL and then move that into your wallet. But we ran our experiments on the DevNet and the testnet, right? So you can very easily create a connection to the DevNet or the testnet, and you can basically go ahead and like this essentially works like a faucet, right? You can like basically go ahead and like airdrop some SOL into your wallet, which you identify with just the public key. You don't need anything else. And so SOL has like a subunit. It's called lamports. I forget exactly what lamports per SOL is, but I think it's like some figure like 100 or 1,000 or something like that, right? And then essentially you sign the transaction and you wait for it to be confirmed on the DevNet or the testnet blockchain, right? And this is kind of important, right? Because if you don't do this, the next thing that you try to do may fail, right? So in order to make sure that like everything is working as intended, we try to introduce some sort of synchronicity in what is otherwise an asynchronous workflow. So yeah, so basically we have covered like, how do we create a wallet and how do we connect to a particular net, and how we can airdrop some currency into that wallet, right? So we can work with it. Now let's talk about minting an NFT. So here's a interesting thing about Solana, right? The Metaplex standard basically stores the metadata separately from the token itself, which is a little bit different from how Ethereum does it. So the ERC 721 implementation typically has like a metadata field in the smart contract itself. So when you mint an NFT, you can actually just pass in the metadata as part of the mint call. You cannot do that with the Metaplex standard, right? They have thought about things a little bit differently. And so essentially what you have to do first is you need to create the metadata data for your NFT, right? And they have exposed an API for it. It's pretty straightforward. You specify the name of your NFT, the symbol, the URI. If you want this to show up on your Solana wallet, this needs to be a link to Arweave, which is an analog to IPFS that you guys might be familiar with in Ethereum land. Pretty much the same concepts, right? They have a notion of royalties. So I think this is an EIP. In Ethereum, I forget the exact number, which basically introduces a function that allows you to set like how much royalties the originator of an NFT gets each time the NFT is sold, right? So in this case, like they've kind of baked it into the smart contract itself, right from the very beginning. And this basically indicates that like anytime this NFT changes hands, the originator or whoever the update authority is, like they basically get 10 basis points, right? Or like 0.1%, I think, of the transactions. Is it 0.1? Yeah, I think so. Like maybe like, yeah, 0.01 or 0.1. And then finally, we have like a list of creators, right? So there could be multiple creators of a specific NFT. So we have like set all of that, and this share out here basically indicates what percentage of the royalties sort of accrue. In this case, there's just one creator, so like 100% of the royalties are basically accrued to this, like the wallet that is like specified in this address, right? So this is basically the metadata, right? Now the next thing that we want to do is actually mint a token, right? So we can do that basically using the Spl Token Library. So Spl Token is basically Solana's token library that is like publicly available. It's basically the library that contains implementations for equivalence of ERC20 and things like that. And it's quite straightforward actually to create a mint, right? You specify the wallet that is actually paying for it. So when you mint an operation, right, like you need to sign that transaction and you need to pay the gas fees essentially, right? So from wallet basically signifies the wallet that is actually paying for it, right? Then you sort of like you specify who the recipient is, right? So that is basically the to wallet, and you just need to specify the public key. And you can also specify who has the update authority. So we set that to the person that we are transferring the NFT over to. So essentially like that authority is also frozen, right? We basically create like exactly one copy of this particular mint. So there are no other copies of this available. And token program ID, this basically refers to the specific contract address of this particular token program, right? And yeah, and then finally you basically create your associated token. This again is basically it's like it's a transaction that you have to sign. So this is also an asynchronous operation, and in order to make sure that it works, you have to basically wait until the operation is done. And then finally you actually mint it to into the specific address that you want to sort of send that token to, right? All right, so here's the thing, right? Like we have basically created our metadata, we have created our token, all right? But remember that unlike Ethereum, right, the metadata is not automatically associated with your token. You have to do that association, right? So we are actually going to go ahead and like create another transaction that publishes the metadata to the Solana, public chain, right? And essentially what that means is that when you create the metadata, you provide the metadata data, right? That's fine. You also provide the mint with which this metadata is associated. Okay. So that's basically this whole edition mint, thing over here. And then of course you specify whoever's like, paying for this operation, right? So that's the from wallet essentially. And there's also obviously the connection. Now, surprisingly, this operation is extremely heavyweight. And in order for this to succeed, you actually have to quite literally wait for 20 seconds for this operation to propagate in the Solana testnet or devnet. I have not measured like what this is on the mainnet, but we can get to that. The other interesting, sorry, I'm just adjusting my camera. Idiosyncrasy here is that the Metaplex standard has essentially it tries to function like record labels. So with music records, you have this like concept of a master edition and secondary copies. All right, and again they have like baked this into their standard and they force you to work with it, right? So your mint is not complete until you actually create a master edition as well, right? So you would go ahead and do that, and it's basically like, yeah, you set like whatever the edition mint is, you set the update authority again, right? And you again specify what the max supply of this master edition is. So essentially you can have like multiple copies of a single like NFT, right? So it's kind of mixing ERC 1155 and 721 in one, and it tries to be very clever about it. But in my opinion, I think it's probably doing it the wrong way. Like it was very difficult to sort of like try and figure out this API and exactly how it works, because the documentation is not that great as well. So what did we learn, right? Well, unlike Ethereum, NFTs in Solana actually involve execution over 2 smart contracts instead of 1. And ERC 721 is like actually very beautiful and straightforward. They have like a very straightforward and simple mint operation, just a single smart contract call that you really have to do, right? This one actually requires 3 operations, right? You mint the token, you create the metadata and associate it with the minted token, and then finally you have to create a master edition. And so essentially, this entire thing actually ends up being slower than if you were doing it in Ethereum, believe it or not. Like minting an NFT on the Solana testnet or devnet, right, like takes about a minute. I think it'll probably be like a little bit faster if you are doing it on the mainnet. So that's the minting part. Getting an NFT, thankfully, is a lot simpler. There is like a very straightforward API call that you can use to basically get all the tokens owned by a particular owner. Again, the original implementation was extremely slow. Someone was able to figure out an optimization. That is why we have a V2, right? And then you can basically like iterate over all the fetched metadata for a particular wallet and figure out like what is the specific NFT you are looking for. So getting an NFT, thankfully, is again just a single API call, right? Now, unfortunately, although it's easier, right? The find tokens by owner V2 is still extremely slow. it takes, I think, like about 5 or 6 seconds to actually get all the tokens that are owned by an owner on DevNet and testnet. And I think it's maybe slightly faster on mainnet, right? Yeah. So we'll do a recap about Solana later on, right? Okay, so the next thing that I want to talk about, given that like we are integrating NFTs into Slack, right? Is how do we respond to a Slack command? So I assume everyone here has worked with Slack. It's a very well-known messaging solution that's deployed at like several companies.
Before we go ahead, should we wait if anyone has questions around the Solana minting process? Because I do.
Okay, yeah, definitely. Happy to like go back a few slides and yeah, let's start from here.
Okay. So what I wanted to know was the Metaplex, right? Is it officially related to Solana?
They claim to be, right? They call themselves the official like NFT partner of Solana. They have an OpenSea like storefront which you can use to purchase NFTs or trade NFTs, create NFTs and auction them, things like that. And it seems to me that like most of the important NFT collections on Solana are, essentially like Metaplex contracts.
Got it. And any of the metadata that we're storing via Metaplex, that's not on chain, or is it?
No, nothing is on chain. As far as I know, the only well, okay, so the metadata is on chain. The actual data itself, right? Like whatever the images, things like that, right? There is, just like with Ethereum, there's IPFS, right? It's like a sister project almost at this point. There is like this project called ARweave, right? Which again claims to be better than IPFS along some dimensions. I haven't really investigated, exactly what the benefits are, but it's again kind of like an analog, right, for Solana land. And there is an implicit assumption in like Solana wallets, right, that your image or your sound or your video or whatever is stored on ARweave or Filecoin or IPFS or things like that, right?
Got it. Yep, I'm gonna open it up to the floor. If anyone has questions, feel free to unmute and ask, or drop it in the chat. I'll ask it for you. Otherwise, we can go ahead to the Slack part.
Hey, hi, Nikhil. I have a quick question regarding, you mentioned that generating a wallet, we can do it using the code, right? So are there any websites from which also you can do that? And so is there a specific website where we can generate the wallet, or it's going to be anywhere, like multiple websites?
I mean, I haven't really used any website to generate the wallet. I mean, so there are multiple aspects about like a wallet, right? Like there is the part where you sort of generate the key pair, right? Those are the primary sort of constituents, right? But a wallet is pretty complex. You also need like sort of a nice UI. You need to basically keep track of, how much tokens, like a particular user has and things like that, right? You need to keep track of the secret, a passphrase. Keep in mind that like with non-custodian wallets, right, like the main issue is around account recovery, right, which none of these things have, right? But anyway, to answer your question, like in terms of wallets, right, I think the most popular Solana wallet out there is Phantom. What I'm basically generating is like programmatically is basically a wallet, but I have no way of or well, actually I need to make like API calls to figure out how many tokens this particular wallet has, right? So yeah, I mean, there is like Phantom that I'm aware of, but if you want to do things programmatically, you have APIs for that as well. Sorry, did that answer your question?
So Phantom is one of the websites. So are there any other websites also which provide the same facility? And at the end, does it, so all the wallets, the public key and secret key, right? So is there a server which actually verifies this particular entity, or is it going to be per website? Like Phantom is one of them. So Phantom might be having also the crypto exchange or the validation of this particular private key, right, which you mentioned.
Yeah. So just so that like this is like explicitly clear, right? Like the most popular centralized exchange is Coinbase, and Coinbase is the only like Coinbase explicitly keeps track of your secret key, right, of your private key. It lets you buy like different coins and everything, and for each of the different L1s, it basically creates a wallet, and it keeps those secret key in its database. Phantom does not do that. All right. With Phantom, if you delete Phantom from your Chrome browser or Bing browser or whatever, right, your wallet is basically, I think it is lost unless you manage to save it into a file somewhere. So there is no central database or anything, right? Like it's basically it's a non-custodian wallet. There is no central authority that is keeping track or keeping custody of your secret key. You are responsible for your secret key.
Got it, understood. Thanks a lot.
Right. And yeah, and just like Phantom, you might have heard of Metamask. So that is another one. There's Portis. There's basically a whole bunch of wallet providers out there. They all have their different pros and cons.
Mm-hmm.
But the vast majority of them, unlike Coinbase, right, explicitly make it very sort of clear to you that like you are responsible for your own private key. So please do not ever forget your secret passphrase, because if you forget your password, right, like that is the only way you can recover your private key. So they advise you to like write it down in a piece of paper and keep it somewhere secure.
Got it. And over here, when we create this particular wallet, right? So does it generate the private key for us and we can save it?
Yeah. So this basically generates a key pair, right?
Mm-hmm.
So keep in mind that like in production, right, like you would never do this unless you are basically creating a throwaway wallet, right? So this is just a pedagogical example. I just want to show you like how to mint an NFT. So from wallet like is basically a wallet that is going to be thrown away at the end of it, right? If you want to actually use a wallet that you own, right, and you are the one who's actually paying for the private, paying for the transaction somehow, you would actually need to instantiate a key pair, right, a private and a public key, using like your public and private key, right? And if you want transfer your token to someone else, right, you just need their public key. That's it, right? So you don't need to create a wallet at that point. You can just work with their public key, right? But if you want to actually pay for something, right, then you have to provide your private key.
Understood. And so previously there was some discussion where Akshata asked about the metadata, right? So continuing on the same thing, finally this particular token which is getting generated, are we going to attach, like how does it get attached to the image or any of the data, and how the verification process actually work? Is there any other slides in the like later on? Is it a...
So actually I can show you like once again, right, like how the metadata is created, right? So when you create your metadata, you basically provide the URI for whatever image that you have, right? If it's a generative NFT or whatever, right? Like you have a PNG, right? Let's say you upload it on ARweave or IPFS or whatever. You basically get that link, right? The IPFS or ARweave link, and you put it here, right? So this URI basically is the thing that you need to worry about. Okay. And you could use, I think there might be another field, I don't quite remember, if you want to put things like attributes, there might be like another field that lets you put any arbitrary information in there. But I'll need to check that, right? And to your second point, how that association is being done with the token. So that is basically being done here, right? When you create the metadata, you provide the metadata data out here, right? This is what we created a few slides back, right? And when we created the SPL token, right? This is basically where the SPL token is created, right? So you've paid for this transaction. You've created a token that is associated with like a particular wallet. That particular token will also have its own public key, and you can associate that metadata that you just created a while back with the public key of that mint.
Got it.
So yeah, so this is where that association is happening. And again, keep in mind, right? Like, I personally find this very weird. All right, with ERC 721, in the mint call, you can provide the metadata indirectly, right? Out here, it's like split over like 2 method calls, which I don't know like why they have done that, but it is the way it is, right?
Got it. Hey, thanks for explaining.
Yeah, thanks for the question.
Does anyone else have any other questions? Okay, Matt's unmuted. Matt, did you unmute to ask a question, or was it just accidental? Okay, fine. Let's go ahead then. Yep.
All right. So let's see. All right. Responding to a Slack command. Yeah. So I mean, you can find most of the information on this link, right? Of basically, how to create a bot and just configure it and things like that. But really, what you need to do in order to respond to a Slack command is to basically configure a post handler, if I'm not mistaken. And if you're using things like Express, right, like this is basically what it looks like. The exact like path to that handler is something that you configure in the Slack UI, the Slack bot UI, right? And you basically implement your request handling. This particular link has information about like what the contents are in the request and how exactly you need to deal with the response in order to get like different effects in the Slack chat, right? So if you want to do threaded messages, or if you want your messages to sort of like interleave somehow, right? Or if you want to like enable more complex interactions, or if you want to show modals, right? Like buttons or things like that, right? You can basically go to this link and like they have examples for like how you can do each of those things, right? And attach it into the response. And you can like have all sorts of like very nice and rich interactions within Slack itself, right? So how do we basically get an NFT? Well, we just get the NFT metadata, right? We go back out here. This is basically the call, like this is basically the code, like essentially the code that we need in order to get an NFT's metadata, right? So we just need like the name of the NFT, right? And we need the public key. We don't really need anything else. But there's a problem. How do you associate the wallet public key of the Slack user? Because in Slack, your request out here is going to have the Slack user ID and the team, right? The workspace that particular user is in. There is no information about the wallet public key, right? If they're using like Phantom, or they're using Metamask or things like that. So we need a way in which we can associate the two, right? So let's basically quickly talk about Phantom, which is the wallet that we use for Solana. It's basically the MetaMask for Solana, right? It's got like all sorts of like features that we've come to expect from these kinds of wallets, right? It's like I said before, it's non-custodial, which means that you are responsible for your own private keys. It is not managing your private key for you, right? It supports NFTs as well, right? So there is like a separate tab in Phantom if you click through, where if your NFT is actually in ARV, it'll show that image. So you have like a nice little window with like your collectibles. It also supports staking directly, so you can do you can like stake your tokens, your souls or whatever, and basically get some return on that. Interestingly, they're also adding support for Ethereum. It's in beta, so they are trying to compete with MetaMask, and they're trying to be chain agnostic. And just like MetaMask and like a lot of these kinds of wallets, right? It's basically a browser extension. And what this means is that like it has the ability to inject itself into any website that you go to, right? So essentially, any website that you go to has the option, if you have Phantom installed, to essentially become a dApp, right? And basically, the way it works is this. So on the server side, right, we are now starting the implementation of the request handler that we discussed out here, right? So we'll start to like add some code here. The first thing that we can do is basically get the Slack team ID and the Slack user ID. The combination of these two things is essentially a fingerprint for the Slack user, right? And we can basically create like in the response, right? Like we can essentially send the user back a link that gets them to open a redirect window, right? Once the user has clicked on that redirect window, and we'll show the demo, right, exactly of how this works. You can basically access the Solana context object, right, which is there in the DOM, right? So Phantom has essentially injected itself into every single website out there whenever you like go to a particular website, right? And using that like context, you can basically connect to your Phantom wallet, right? Super simple. This is obviously an asynchronous call. So what this basically does is it brings up the Solana Phantom wallet, right? And it prompts you to essentially enter your password, right, and sign into Phantom. Now, once you've done that, we can actually get access to your public key, right? And what we can then do is basically send a post request with your team ID, your user ID, and your public key. And once we are back on the server side, we essentially store this association between the team ID, the user ID, and the public key. So now, anytime in the future. So essentially, this kind of works like a sign-in mechanism, right? That associates like your Slack credentials, or at least like your non-secret Slack credentials with the non-secret part of your wallet, right? And now we can basically put all the pieces together, right? So in order to get NFTs into Slack, we, number one, set up the Slack request handler, right? We redirect users to a Phantom login prompt, if initially we don't know what their public key is. We then proceed to connect the Slack user ID with the wallet public key. And finally, once that is done, we can fetch their NFTs using the public key. That's all we need. So let me actually show you a demo of how this is done. So Akshata, you said I have to click on this?
Yep.
All right.
Is that
So Akshata, right?
So go ahead.
Yeah. I don't know if this is sharing some audio or whatever, right? But like she's right. Yeah, you catching the match today. So there was like some NBA match going on, which we were both following. I was like, yeah, super excited. And then she's like, wait, what? I got my NFT support moment, right? And our Slack bot is called Niffy. So she types /Niffy dunk. And it shows this GIF, right? And I'm like, wait, what's this? Where did you get this? So she actually bought an NFT. So this represents an NFT. And you can use the Niffy Slack bot to actually do that. And yep, that's right, an NFT meme. This is pretty cool. So I got to check this out. So I tried doing the exact same thing. Now here's the problem. I don't own Dunk. It's an NFT. It's artificially scarce. Only Akshata owns it. I haven't signed into Metaphi. So I sign in with Metaphi. Right? I put in my phantom credentials and I'm signed in. I don't own that name, but I can buy it on Metaphi. Right? So the folks at Metaphi are going to like have like a storefront or something where you can actually go ahead and like buy that NFT. Right? But if I owned like any other NFT, right, like I could basically do like /Niffy and type in the NFT name, and it would get the metadata and it would show that meme on Slack, and no one else can use it because I'm the only one who actually owns that NFT. All right. So next slide. It's not. All right. So yeah, let's talk about our experience, right? So when I was developing this, right, so I'm sad to report that like the Metaplex APIs or even the Solana APIs for that matter, they are not really well documented. I mean, a lot of this stuff is still evolving, but essentially the public APIs that they had don't really work out of the box. And I needed to do a lot of research, like really dig into the code, maybe even now down to the Rust level to really understand, what the hell's going on, right? Like the idiosyncrasies around like attaching the metadata to the token and then creating a master edition. It's fairly non-obvious stuff, right? And also, in my opinion, it's unnecessarily complicated. I think those guys are like trying to do too many things at once. And basically, I don't think like a lot of thought, and of course, like keep in mind, these are my opinions. But my opinion is that like, I don't think like the APIs have been like, particularly well thought through. And so they tend to be unnecessarily complicated. The other interesting thing is that the testnet and the mainnet are pretty unstable. So around the time when I was experimenting with this, right, like the Solana testnet like went down, the mainnet went down, and people were, basically saying that like the D in Solana stands for decentralization. Essentially, like Solana is not really decentralized. Also, interestingly, I got banned temporarily. My screenshot tool is not really working, but I actually sent a mail to the particular node that I was connecting to, and I asked them like, hey, can you unban me? And these guys were like, yeah, the testnet and devnet like don't really support extremely expensive operations like NFTs. And I found that like a little bit surprising, because Solana, like on its website, advertises like, oh, we do 65,000 TPS. Here's a tool that you can actually use to spam Solana, and try to break it. I wasn't even spamming them. It was like every 30 or 40 seconds, I was like retrying an operation, and I ended up getting banned. Right. The other interesting thing is that like, I really sort of like got a feel of how slow getting things from Solana is. Slack has a very generous 3-second timeout, right? Within which you have to respond. You can do a lot of things in 3 seconds. Like computers today are really, really fast. 3 seconds is a long time, even with like network round trips. There are tons of things that you can do within 3 seconds, right? You can open a connection to a database. You can do some, all sorts of queries on it within a reasonable bound, of course. Get results back, parse through it and like actually send something out, right? Just getting the metadata for an NFT takes significantly longer. So essentially the demo that we showed you, we actually got a little bit lucky. In many cases, like the operation would just time out. And what I ended up having to do was like, sort of take the next step and essentially make the whole like get operation asynchronous. So, there was an aspect of system design in that, where I had to basically move some computation over to, GCP task queues and essentially respond to Slack, on a response URL well after the 3-second timeout, right? So in the meantime, I would basically show, getting an NFT. Obviously, that is not like the best UI, right? You want this thing to be like fast and really responsive. But unfortunately, the L1 that we are working with does not allow you to do that. So just to end this, basically the TLDR is that direct blockchain development is really, really hard. It's not easy. Took me, I mean, I like to think that I'm a reasonably competent engineer. I've worked on some like fairly complex systems. I had a tough time, okay, doing like direct development on Solana. The lack of documentation obviously does not help, especially if you're working on a system that has a steep learning curve as it is. The other thing that I struggled with a lot is there's an incredibly large amount of fragmentation, right? Like in terms of the number of wallets, in terms of the number of L1s, Solana has one way of doing things. We want to do something on Flow, right? On which NBA Top Shot is actually based. They have a completely different flow, right, of working with wallets. If you want to do something on Ethereum, it's completely different. If you want to do something on Harmony, it's like another thing altogether, right? And you have like different languages as well in which you can write your smart contract. Like there's Rust, the Solidity. In some cases, they use their own, their own like language that they have created just for that. And to top it all off, NFTs mean different things for different L1s, right? For Ethereum, it means ERC 721, but as we saw that in Solana land, it means something completely else. It means something what an organization called Metaplex has defined, right? And because they get to be the like an important sort of like strategic partner for Solana, right? You have to live with that, right? And so this lack of standardization is also extremely challenging to sort of work with, right? So Metaphi basically, these folks, like they're super cool. They're trying to make all of this like super easy, right? Like what these guys really want to do, is essentially like create an API that lets you work with NFTs, right? And across like different blockchains, across different L1s or even L2s if you're in Ethereum land, using like some very straightforward APIs, right? Like a straightforward API to mint, to get, to transfer to someone else, right? Or to burn a token if that's what you want to do. So I'm pretty stoked about these guys, and so I would like suggest that you join their Discord. I've joined their Discord. I'm following along, and yeah, definitely also follow them on Twitter, right? And yeah, I think that's about it. That's the last slide. So I want to open the floor for questions. I would love to take questions and be of help, basically.
Thanks a ton, Nikhil. There is a question on chat by Matt. He's asking, wouldn't the timeout be related to the ARWave testnet response time?
That is probably true. I think the fact that I was on the testnet, definitely played a role. But if you are developing something, right, developing on mainnet is not exactly feasible because there is like real money involved, and you don't want to like burn cash, just when you are doing like software development. You obviously also have the opportunity of developing on like a local node, right? So a node that you've sort of deployed and you're testing against that. That is also dangerous because that might give you false confidence in how well your software actually works. So what you really want to do is work with a truly distributed, decentralized testnet and mainnet that is well maintained. That gives you an idea of like what your software will or how your software will perform in the real world, right? And if that infrastructure is unstable, it's very hard to like make a claim that the production infrastructure is also going to be stable, because essentially they, in a sense, like run the same code, right? And in fact, like the testnet is supposed to be like it's canarying newer features, right? But my experience has been that like I don't really have any confidence in the testnet and the devnet working out. And not only that, like it's like my impression is not like held by the fact that you hear news articles of Solana going down and being unavailable for extended periods of time, right? Like that is not how a decentralized project should work.
Got it. You really don't like Solana anymore.
I mean, I think that like, what they're trying to do is cool, but yeah, like, when the, rubber hits the road, right? Like, that's when you get a real sense of, whether this thing actually was. I mean, theory is good. In practice, there are like other things that come up, right? And I think like so far, yeah, like, Solana has been a bit underwhelming.
That's an interesting point. Anyone else has any questions? Okay, I guess not. I'm going to post all the links again in the chat. And Nikhil, do you have any resources that you can share in terms of Solana development? Or
Yeah.
the GitHub for this, or anything else that you can share with us?
Yes, absolutely. So I think offline, I can basically share links with a project that I followed, NFT Armory. It's authored by a person whose name I don't know. But I like that project was invaluable in helping me get an understanding of how, Metaplex works. And definitely the Solana Web3 JS is also something that I read. So I'll, give pointers to that as well. And yeah, I think that's about it. Like, those are the two resources that I use. And yeah, basically, the Slack API is fairly well documented. It works more like a framework than a library, but the link that I provided here actually is, fairly good. Like, I think they cover all the basics, pretty well.
Yep, I have the link to NFT Armory, so I'm going to just post that on the chat. And the rest of the links, I guess I can send out in another mail after this, once you give them to me.
Sounds good.
Okay. Okay, guys, if anyone else has any other questions, then feel free to unmute, ask. Otherwise, we can start ending the session.
Hey, thanks for this session. It was really helpful. Nikhil, initially you mentioned NFT use cases, right? Like, could you elaborate a little bit on like how is it going to benefit in the future?
Yeah, so that is an interesting question. That's a great question. I love that question, right? Like, I have been following like the whole NFT space with like a mix of, amusement and, maybe even like a little bit of disgust. I don't like the speculative nature about it. Like, definitely, I think NFTs have been used as a mechanism for, money laundering. We all know in the crypto space, that is like a big problem. And it seems very amusing to me that, like, things like, Bored Ape Yacht Club and like, DJ Napes have like such, sky high valuations, right? But in a sense that like they have captured the imagination of the public at large, right? Like, you have like, Gen Z folks especially, right? Like younger kids, like, who are actively sort of like talking about NFTs, right? Like, who are considering it in their day-to-day life. And if you I mean, I don't know exactly how young or how old you are, right? Like, but I was born in 1988, and I grew up in the 90s and 2000, right? So I remember like
I
back in
think
the
I'm
day.
2 years younger to you.
Okay, yeah. So you might have like played with those like WWE cards, right? And you would do those like card trading, like that. That was a big thing in like 95, 96. There were like Pokemon cards and Beyblade and whatnot, right? Like, I think this is this generation's equivalent in the digital world. So there is some appeal to that. And even like way before, right? Like, you had like baseball cards, right? And you had these like baseballs that were used for like one specific match, and it was a big deal, right? It was like some super important match, right? Like Babe Ruth or someone like hit that ball for like a home run or something. It has like tremendous value. So I think like NFTs are like filling that space for now. Also, interestingly, like, I think there is a possibility of some very interesting brands to come out in the Web3 space. So like, Bored Ape now I know has a collaboration going on with Nike or someone, right? Like, and they might like, produce Bored Ape merchandise, right? And there is definitely like a subculture that is sort of formed around it. So I think like NFTs like have this great ability to essentially bring a community of folks around them, which I think is powerful, and something else that, you can use NFTs for, right? Like in, I know that like I grew up in Calcutta, right? And we have these like, country clubs and whatnot, right? Like it's very difficult to get memberships in those places. There's similar concepts here as well, right? Like the really popular, golf courses where all the rich people or politically well-connected people sort of like hobnob, right? It's very difficult to get memberships. I see those kinds of like communities like forming in the crypto space as well, where very like influential people in the crypto space own some OG NFT collections, right? And now you sort of use that as like a password, right, into this elite world, right? So you see like you can see all those use cases sort of coming up. Still early days, and I'm following this space with like a lot of interest, but I think like there is a possibility that like even more interesting use cases for NFTs come up in the future, right? Like around gaming, say,
And as you also mentioned regarding the money laundering, which they are kind of somehow helping them, right? Like, do you think there will be any additional regulations which will be coming in place in this area?
I think so. I mean, yeah, I think it's too big of a problem now for the authorities to ignore. I mean, in India, I've heard that. So China, I think, has like banned crypto, but they have their own like. I mean, they've essentially put their own like currency on the blockchain, right? So I just don't think that they want any competitors. India is like thinking about it or like regulating it somehow. It's very likely that we will see some sort of like regulation around crypto in the US as well, right? Like there's already noises being made around like KYC and AML, anti-money laundering requirements and things like that, right? So yeah, I think like there is soon going to be, maybe not soon, right? But it's definitely on the horizon, right? There's going to be some order in this wild west world, right, of crypto and NFTs.
Yeah. And do you think this can solve the problem of the piracy, which is like a long thing which is going on, MP3, movies, all those things?
That is a great question. I think it depends on the solution. I mean, look, there's already DRM, right? Like digital rights management. Honestly, I think like the best way to combat piracy, again, this is my opinion, right, is to make whatever media you are trying to consume like easily accessible. Generally, people are like willing to pay. It's only like in relatively poorer countries like with low GDP per capita where you would see these kinds of things, right? Like where people would be actually working to sort of circumvent the controls you have put in place, but it's not like you're getting a lot of revenue out of those places anyway, right? It's mostly like in the richer markets, like the US and Europe, where like a lot of sort of media companies are making their revenue. So I don't know. I think it's a bit of a mixed bag. I'm not completely sure. What I definitely can see happening is that as artists, musicians, as they get like more savvy about NFTs and crypto, right? Like I can definitely imagine things like, say, like a limited edition sort of record or something, right, being issued through NFTs, right? Like imagine like, if Led Zeppelin, recorded a song back in the day and there's just one copy of that song, right? Whoever owns that copy is like sitting on a gold mine, right? Like there'll be like a lot of people who will be willing to pay a lot of good money, right, to own that record. You can definitely imagine like, say, someone like Taylor Swift, right? Like if she wanted to, she could probably do this. Like she could record a song. The only way you can access that song is if you buy a specific NFT, right? You can use that as a key to access that song now. I think like an NFT like that would go for like a lot of good money.
Got it. And so previously when we did the minting for NFT, so if you want to transfer the ownership, is it an update which we need to do, or we need to delete the previous token and recreate a new token?
No, so you can actually do that. So just as a reminder, right? Like there is the owner. Let me see if I can find that.
There are shares as well, right? But this
Yes.
ownership then.
Yeah. So there are shares as well. That's true. But more simply, right? You have an owner and you have an update authority. Okay. So there is the person who owns the NFT, but the person who owns the NFT doesn't necessarily have the rights to modify that NFT. Right. So the person that actually originally minted the NFT can basically set that authority to be themselves. Right. I mean, for purposes of pedagogy, out here, I basically set these two to be the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Right. The owner is also the update authority, but that doesn't need to be the case.
Got it. So it can be any other third party as well. And
basically, yes. So a separate third party has like an update authority. They don't have the authority to transfer. They have the authority to update the metadata. Right.
Got it. Okay, thanks a lot.
Yeah, definitely. Great questions.
It was very interesting discussions going on. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, thanks, Akshata, for organizing this event.
Thanks for attending. Thanks for all the awesome questions and making it such an interactive session. Okay, guys. Anyone else has other questions?
I do want to say, so I actually work with Solana a lot. So I do want to say, like, everything you said about like it being hard to get into and stuff like that, that's very much noted. I think that's correct. Like, it's just a very new space and things are moving so fast that things are a little bit disjoint. That being said, like I do think that my comment about the test net, like we're just kind of beholden to Arweave's test net, and I understand like the desire to have a live performance based on it, but it's yeah, you're just dealing with these free distributed systems of things that don't really have a way of getting accurate payment for it. So it's kind of I don't know, that one is just kind of harder because it's not even Solana, because like Arweave is independent entity blockchain, but that's where those response times are coming from. The other thing is
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was also just going to say that yeah, like Solana did go down once in September, but it hasn't gone down since. Like there's obviously a lot of just crazy things that people say on the internet when things happen, but yeah, that's yeah.
So yeah, so just to clarify, right, like I as a developer, I had like a reasonably good experience, like despite the lack of documentation. Once everything clicked together, right, I had like a relatively good experience. I didn't want to come across as like I'm like anti-Solana or whatever, right? Like I would really like the Solana project to succeed, and I'm glad that like you're here, right? Because you can hopefully like take this feedback to the Solana devs, and like hopefully things can be made like significantly better. Because I do think that Solana is like is like positioned really well against Ethereum, right? It aims to solve the problem in a more elegant way, which I can always appreciate, right? And it has this like operational simplicity, with the lack of L2s and like rollups and all of that crap, right? And I think like that's the way a system should be, right? What I will say is that like regarding the DevNet and the testnet, right? Like there is not a lot of transparency when it comes to like knowing exactly how you can be throttled, or if you are banned, like how you can be unbanned, right? It's like very hit or miss. Like I know that like there is a specific node operator against whom I'm like sending my requests, right? I have no insight into like if I wanted to ask them like, hey, this is my IP, can you give me more bandwidth? I'm happy to pay for it, right? There is no way to do that, right? Like the only way I can get control in any real sense is if I run my own sort of node and test against that. But as you know, I think you understand, right? Like that has its limitations. It can give you a sense of false confidence, like how performant your software is. Like you really want something that is more representative of real world, right?
Well, there's a couple of things there. I mean, I don't think you really should do a live mint if if you don't have either your own node or pay somebody. In this, that goes for Ethereum too. Like that's why Alchemy exists and things like that. Because nodes can drop you, and like as you're saying, is if you don't get proliferate. This is Ethereum. This is Solana. This is like you're kind of beholden to a decentralized network of people accepting your transaction and then proliferating it. And if you don't have either your own node to do that or pay a service to do that, then you could get screwed on your mints. Yeah,
absolutely. Are you aware of like similar services like Alchemy for Solana? Because I couldn't find any.
Yeah, there's a whole. I mean, I'm happy to. There's a whole RPC infrastructure. In fact, Genesis Go just did a IDO, and they have some that's more open source. They have extra bandwidth they give out for free. But they just did an IDO on Solana. Like I don't know, they raised like $50 million. But so that's one. But there's a couple other. Quick Node, which does Ethereum as well. Triton. I don't know. I can send you if you're interested. I can send you documentation. Yeah.
Cool. I'm just curious to know, like you don't have to respond to this, but like I just wanted to bring to your attention like an interesting observation. So, Moxie Marlinspike, who's a very well-known security researcher, right? Like I think he did a write-up on Web3, and he sort of like made the point that like no one wants to run their own servers, right? Whether they be decentralized or centralized. And I think like it's basically come to that point, right? Where essentially like you have to work with like QuickNode or Alchemy, like or things, right? I mean, there is like someone else who is like operating those servers on your behalf. So I just think that's like interesting. That's already happening.
Yeah, it is kind of weird. I mean, so I don't know how to. There's a lot here, obviously. Yeah, like there's a lot of things that aren't like quite ideal. Like you can't just like spin up something and just like proliferate out to the network and then it just goes like there is other layers on top of it. And I think kind of to your point that I think Solana has a certain amount of requirements on our nodes, and that's how we like flack of not being decentralized or whatever, because we have you have to have a multi-threaded processor basically, and a few other things. But yeah, and that does make it harder for you just whatever random laptop you're on or whatever to actually even spin that up to run it yourself. Whereas that is there's definitely a bit of, and I think over time those barriers will lower. Like I said, like Genesis Go, like for example, like they're trying to lower the barrier by making some of these things, just public and like at least put some level of bandwidth to the public. But like you're saying, you still are beholden at some point to their network bandwidth. There's other people on the network or whatever. Yeah, especially for the test nets that don't have the same amount of like resolutions of certain things.
Right. Yeah, thank you for the great feedback, right? Like yeah, definitely if someone else is like trying to essentially like run workloads that might be a bit heavier for the testnet or devnet, right? Like I would encourage them, like I would basically try and look for these like other node operators. And
I will say that the testnet very much is just like DevNet is basically way more stable than the testnet. On Solana. But yeah, if QuickNode and these others have their test infrastructure as well, that you and that's the way you if you really want to like go for a production environment, not like a project that you're graciously giving up your time to do and you're actually trying to make money off it, that's the way you'd go. But yeah, I mean, it definitely is a problem with like eating glass to try to just to see what it's like. Yeah, because you have to run all these performance issues and things.
Yep.
Because it's not easy. It's not like, because I don't know, it's not like EC2, because that's kind of what all these state machines are. They're like decentralized EC2, but they're just way harder because you're having to manage all these other things that aren't really, there's no like centralized source to, that's writing exact documentation for it or doing all that stuff.
Yeah, I definitely see like Web3 DevOps becoming a thing in the future. Like it's definitely going to happen, I think. It'll be an interesting like evolution.
Cool. Thanks, Matt. Thanks for another perspective. That was great. If anyone else has questions, then we can take those, or we can say bye and go on with our Sundays or end of Saturdays. Depends on where you're from.
Yep.
Okay, going once, twice, thrice. Okay, no more questions. Thanks, guys. Thanks for joining. And
yes, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Akshata, especially for setting this up.